Hi again, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 Annual LiDAR EFI Cross-Country Checkup. My name is Sharon Young from the Canadian Institute of Forestry, and we are very pleased to collaborate with Philip-Edouard Shay at the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre to host this webinar. The CIF will be providing the platform and technical support for this webinar. Please note a few important house rules. During the webinar, all the participants will be muted with the exception of panelists and hosts. To share a comment or idea with all speakers and participants, please use the chat tool. You can click the chat icon in the Zoom toolbar, which is at the bottom of your screen. A chat window will appear on the right-hand side of the screen where you can type your message. Please post questions in the Q&A pod. A reminder that there will be a post-webinar survey for all the participants to fill out after the Q&A session. If you run into any technical issues, please email us at electures@cififc.org or send us a private message using the Zoom chat. With that, I will now pass it over to Philip, Forest Research Officer from the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre, who will moderate and kick off this webinar.
Thank you, Sharon. Here, I'm just sharing my screen here. Hopefully, slideshow. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, thank you. Well, welcome everyone to the Enhanced Forest Inventory Cross-Country Checkup of 2025. It's a pleasure to have you all here. My name is Philip-Edouard Shay, and I work for the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre, so part of the Canadian Forest Service. And I'm here based in Fredericton on the unceded territories of the Wolastoqiyik, which are governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties. So to start us off, I'll introduce you to the general idea of an enhanced forest inventory to make sure that you're all better prepared to digest the content that's going to be delivered by our guest speakers today. So I put these pictures here on the opening slide just to remind us of the importance of a well-characterized forest inventory. Better mapping of what's on the ground can really help operational planning and the rest of the whole value chain, forest value chain. As you can imagine, you would want to implement different silviculture treatments in these two stands, so they likely need different equipment to do so, and they'll produce a different basket of products for different downstream markets. So when searching on the internet for an EFI, you'll likely get a bunch of Government of Canada links and publications. They usually pop up first, but there can still be some confusion in the terms that we use to define tools or techniques and products. So an EFI that we're generally looking at an area-based approach, ideally wall-to-wall, meaning that there's continuous seamless mapping of forest attributes. The definition used here by Joanne in this important 2017 report refers to a so-called LiDAR-based EFI, so the airborne laser scanning one. But today we're going to take an even broader perspective on EFIs, so something more along the lines of what's described on our NRCan website. So something that enhances the quality, accuracy, and precision of forest inventory data, produce information to a level of precision that's required for the whole value chain optimization. And in Canada, it's important to distinguish between our national level inventory and jurisdictional forest resource inventories. That can differ both in scales and application. So our national forest inventory here favors statistical rigor to allow for national and international reporting and policymaking. It's a sample-based assessment at a coarse national scale. Forest resource inventories, on the other hand, or vegetation resource inventories, and depending on where you are in different provinces, they use the best information available to characterize and map finer scales needed for forest resource management and focus on the current condition so that you can forecast timber supply and help government and industry with decision making. So as I said, today, we're going to focus on this forest resource inventory scale. So there's a long history of forest inventory improvement since the first stand level management inventory in the mid-19th century. These improvements go hand in hand with the development of technology and the digitalization of forest inventory tools. The primary goal of forest inventories throughout has always been to delineate stands with similar attributes and then to quantify the forest resources therein to make resource management decisions. And there's been a big leap in forest inventorying that came when we started to use digital stereo aerial imagery to delineate forest stands and more accurately, and to interpret species composition. So this is what you see on the right side of the slide here. And on the left, we have these historical forest map inventory maps from around Port Alberni in BC. So the top one being from 1956 and the bottom one from 1970. And I show these to show you the progression from hand-drawn features based on traditional survey cartography to more precise digital geolocated polygons. Now with an EFI, we're enhancing this even more, and we're moving from polygonal level of detail to a substand spatial resolution of wood volume distributions, often at the 20 by 20 meter cell resolution. You can even, there's even a need for maps that integrate even more individual tree characterization so that we can know exactly how many trees of a particular economic or ecosystem value there is in a certain area. And this is, is this tree good for logs or just pulp? Does it have a good fiber? Is it good for wildlife habitat? So these are all kind of a detail that we would like to enhance. We can also enhance the spatial resolution of other attributes, such as topography and soil wetness. That's also useful for operationally, for example, for helping planning road construction and navigating through the terrain. There's also an increasing desire to map other ecosystem services, ecosystem characteristics in forest resource inventories, such as non-commercial species, soils and carbon. There's a lot more stakeholders wanting forest information for various applications that are well beyond timber management. Over here, there's also a need to improve the accuracy and precision of our forest inventories, especially if you want to take strategic decisions that can be implemented operationally. Hence the importance of calibration and validation procedures in your internal, of internal products and also of external products if you're contracting things out. But what is precise enough, and how do you assess this precision? And what is needed to maintain this accuracy and precision over time? And so there'll always be a balancing act, because the more attention you take to improve these upper fork features here, the more cost that will be in the time that it takes to generate your EFI or update it. It'll be more costly. Maybe it's going to be less user-friendly as it becomes more complicated, more data management and human resources involved. So it's a balancing act. And to build your EFI, you generally want to fuse ground-based aerial and satellite technologies to generate value-added inventory map products. So essentially, you're using the benefits of a technology to overcome the weaknesses of another. The general idea is to use a sampling unit with a known value, so your ground truths, such as a tree DBH measurement, and then develop a relationship between this known value and that of a data product that has a broader spatial coverage, such as your ALS point cloud over here. And then you extrapolate these values that you receive from your model to the whole area of interest that you want to characterize. And how you do so will depend on your input data, your inventory objectives, and the available tools that you have at hand. But the fusion of data sets will undeniably require good spatial temporal referencing. So make sure that you have a plan before you start collecting data and contracting services. So EFIs come in different flavors, as I was saying, each with different pipelines and requirements. Some are still exploratory research, while others are operational repeatable pipelines. So here's a basic workflow for building a LiDAR-based EFI, and I'll go over this in more detail over the next few slides. All EFIs are multidisciplinary endeavors by nature. And so to ensure the timely delivery and you have useful data, you need to know exactly what expertise you want and need and where. So your EFI plan should definitely take under consideration the objectives that you have for your inventory, what you plan on mapping, what technologies that you have at hand and want to use, how you plan on processing the data, hosting it, and how you're going to do quality control, how you're going to schedule all these activities so that they all work seamlessly and provide your product at the right time. And are you going to be contracting these operations out, or are you going to do them in-house? Now, the first thing that you need is your large-scale, high-resolution data. So unless you have your own pilot, team of engineers, and sensor-equipped plane or UAV or other vehicle, you'll likely need help from a procurement officer, ideally with some remote sensing expertise, to acquire the imagery or LiDAR product. And so we have some guidelines here for the federal guidelines that can help with the LiDAR acquisition. And then you'll also, after you acquire that product, you'll need a remote sensing specialist to likely stitch together the data sets or process the data to generate LiDAR metrics or summarize the remote sensing product at a smaller scale. And then, so here we have, the LiDAR package that can help with that, or the LAS tools. We also have the new LAS-R data package that helps create pipelines for terabytes of point cloud processing. And so you'll likely need to ingest large scale of recurring data sets. So a database architect and data scientist can be really useful to make sure that your data is findable, usable in the short and long term. You need to archive some and so on. Most EFIs now also integrate other ancillary data sets in their models. For example, environmental data such as soils, topography, geology, and climate, or other satellite imagery products. You'll likely need support then from other subject matter experts to generate or to use these products in your EFI development. Before committing to using one of these, though, make sure that you ask yourself, is this product stable through time? Or will you need to update it or grow this product when you're renewing your EFI? Is it a good predictor of forest attributes? So a priori reasoning can ensure that your model generation is founded on sound science and logic. Now, the key to your EFI was to find those detailed ground truths that you'll eventually be linking to the remotely sensed data to generate your spatially explicit attributes at larger scales. So first, you need to consider a sampling design that can properly represent attributes variability across the area of interest. So here we have the SGS-R package that can help structurally guide your sampling. And then you'll need to figure out how you're going to be collecting these samples of the data in a way that ensures that these can be linked spatially and temporally to the remotely sensed data. So proper geopositioning is necessary. So pick a tool that with the right accuracy for your desired outcome. And whether you're looking at harvester head data or tree mensuration measurements, you'll need some field crew to go collect this data. You'll likely need also lab technicians if you're dealing with soil samples that need to be processed, and the expertise to compile the data, such as a computer programmer or growth and yield modeler, so that your field sampling measurements can correspond to the time of remote sensing data acquisition. The next step is then you typically separate your data into training, testing, and validation data sets that are ready for model development. So it's critical to annotate and label these data sets properly. And this involves also cropping the point clouds or other wall-to-wall products and ancillary data sets to the extent of your ground truth measurements, and then overlaying these data sets it requires proper orthorectification and geographic positioning. So making these training data sets is costly. So think about how to make these reusable, shareable, and interoperable. And then you can finally proceed to the development of your error-based model, so either metric or non-parametric, with the help of a computer programmer or AI specialist. And then you'll validate these models with the help of a statistician, likely. There's a plethora of approaches to do so, but keep in mind that simple is usually better with at least number of predictors. And then finally, also, this whole step will likely require some IT support because as you grow in size, you'll need to set up an infrastructure that can deal with the large data processing. And the final step is that you can finally apply your model to your area of interest. So using your wall-to-wall remotely sensed metrics to extrapolate point level measurements to a broader, larger scale. For example, by plot matching your pixel with a known ground truth to those outside of the scope of the ground calibration. So large areas of interest can require substantial computing power, like I was saying, and data management. So likely you'll need a team of people that can help you out on that scope. And then you'll also need to further validate your product afterwards to make sure that it's applied reasonably. So having your subject matter experts is a good idea at this point. Finally, you can redraw the standard level boundaries if you need, and then summarize your attributes of interest for each polygon of interest. Ideally, your EFI plan should also consider how you will keep your EFI up to date. So whether it is rebuilding your EFI inventory from scratch, growing your inventory using growth simulators, or updating parts of your inventory using change detection. So keep in mind that there's always a time lag between the data acquisition and inventory deployment. So now I'll quickly show you an example that shows you how there's still room for improvement in these LiDAR-based EFIs as an example. So this is the Acadia Research Forest. It's a federal research forest just outside of Fredericton, where we can test new tools and approaches. And here we have an extremely dense network of ground plots every 500 meters. We have an 11.28 fixed radius plot. We're going to measure trees, and we use this data to train our LiDAR model and generate our EFI. And on the right, I'm showing you a photo-interpreted polygon that was populated with LiDAR EFI metrics. But despite all this effort and the richness of data, we failed to capture the difference between a pre-commercially thin stand, delineated here in pink, from adjacent non-treated ones, essentially highlighting the challenges of mapping stalking and stem density. In this case, changing the photo-interpreted lines may have resolved the issue, for example, by integrating a priority stand history information during the photo interpretation, or we could have redrawn the polygons using the agglomerated nearby raster cells with similar EFI attributes. Though it's unclear whether the dense overstored cover really did capture the density of this suppressed tree layer. So nonetheless, both of these approaches may also have led to an overly reductionist inventory that are impossible to manage. So it's important to remember the scale of solution, to scale your solutions to strategic, tactical, and operational realities. And even within our same pre-commercially thin area, forest structure can vary widely in naturally regenerating Wabanaki Acadian forests here out east. So what I want to emphasize here is there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to get a better mapping of forest structure and individual tree attributes using EFI tools and approaches. This is especially pressing for hardwood stands, where attributes like branching angle can really affect the resulting basket of products. So the idea of mapping more forest tree characteristics can be further expanded to information across disciplines. So here's a nice little example from Switzerland where they're integrating multidisciplinary values into their new national EFI framework. So hence the EFI paradigm here, it seems to be moving from the traditional sustainable timber harvesting towards broader issues such as wildlife habitat, disease, carbon sequestration, biodiversity, ecosystem services, and maybe even indigenous values. Canada is a big country with a lot of variability in its landscape, forest structure, composition, traditions, technologies, expertise, regulations, policies, and land ownership. And all these factors will influence the readiness and willingness to adopt new technologies such as remote sensing tools and EFIs. So these factors will also guide your forest management needs and hence the type of EFI that best suits you. So we likely will need custom solutions in different parts of the country, but sharing information and technological developments is a benefit to all, and hence why we're here today. So I'll end with these few messages to remind you that EFIs are the product of multidisciplinary collaboration with significant components that are digital. EFIs can be complicated and require many different skill sets to develop and implement. And so ask for help and input from others. So forestry can no longer be done by one sole forester, and we have a lot of people here that can help. So feel free to reach out at the end of this presentation to the people that you can ask questions to. To technology developers and scientists, make sure you work directly with industry and provinces and territories to understand their unique limitations and challenges and work on solutions that suit their end user needs. And finally, find ways of quantifying uncertainty at operational scales. So please share your methods, pipelines, and document things through our scripts and put your models on GitHub. And I'm going to finish with a special thanks to all of our speakers for spreading their knowledge and insights and for making this event possible. I really appreciate it. So that was it for me. I'll just stop sharing and then invite our first speaker. If Rob is present.
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being our first presenter.
No problem.
And lead the way whenever you're ready.
All right, let's just test to make sure this works. So you can share.
The big green button in the middle.
And okay.
Perfect. I can see your screen. Oh, and now I see you I see your notes, I believe. So if you want to share your others, oh, there we go, swap. Perfect. You're good to go.
Should work. Good. Yeah, thanks to the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre for hosting this. These events prove very useful in terms of getting a glimpse of what other provinces and even the federal government is doing with respect to EFI and related forestry information. So yeah, thanks for having me. For New Brunswick, I'm going to give a quick overview of just some recent new developments that we've been dealing with for forest inventory. For those not familiar with New Brunswick, we're predominantly a forested area. We're about 82% forested. We also have a fair bit of mixed ownership. It's more or less 50-50 split between Crown lands and private. Most of the landowners in the province rely on our department for forest inventory, and specifically for Crown lands, we do a management plan, a forest management plan every 5 years. So in forest inventory becomes quite important when we're dealing with those types of things. Not much different than any other province or territory. Forest inventory is pretty important to being the backbone for management planning, conservation forest harvest, conservation forest, identification of species of risk and other related things, forest health operational planning, and so on. And specifically as well, that's been really useful in the past is the support for research, development, and technology that comes out of it. So it's been so collecting inventory in our province is quite important to support those things. So we've been doing photo interpretation for quite a while, since the beginning of 1980, early 1980s. It's the foundation for which we collect our inventory. We typically classify our lands into 4 broad categories, and that's water, non-forest, wetland, and forest. So starting back in the early 1980s, we really started coming into what we would see as what I would define as a modern photo interpreted inventory. We've gone through approximately 4 cycles since then. They're about a 10-year cycle each. The start of which was relying on about 7 or so interpreters in the past, to the current, where we're actually relying on essentially 5.5 interpreters. So you can see how that has changed in terms of the information, the amount of effort that's being put into it. So yeah, that's where we are. We're currently in that last 4th inventory cycle. We're actually not really finished it. We're anticipating to be completing mid-year 2025. That would be 5 years after our last aerial photography year, which is quite late compared to in previous years. But again, it's doing the same thing with less resources. It's a bit of a challenge. How generally has our forest inventory changed over the years? Yeah, so starting in the early 1980s, and even to this point, we've always identified a merchantable and unmerchantable layer, the traditional attributes of your development stage, crown closure, and your tree species composition, and there's many others. Starting in 2013, we started collecting LiDAR, and this represented a significant boost in terms of getting forest inventory metrics to be rolled up to the stand level and to provide more additional information. So essentially, LiDAR derived forest attributes have either replaced or even possibly surpassed many of the photo interpreted attributes. However, we do rely on our photo interpretation still for at least 2 main things, and that's stand boundary updates, like part of a plantation might have failed due to site, And we also rely heavily on photo interpretation for tree species composition. Capturing the tree species composition at the EFI level remains quite elusive for us. So we have identified 5 challenges with photo interpretation that we've always struggled with and that we want to sort of rectify going into the future. We've always found photo interpretation to be quite time consuming and quite a manual process. And I don't think anybody who crossed the country who's purchased photo interpretation contracts, there's quite a lag between when you capture the imagery and do the photo interpretation and waiting to get that data into your hands. We also know that photo interpretation is expensive. We also know that the number of interpreters is decreasing, at least in this part of the country. There appears to be a bit of a lack of interest to keep it as a profession. We also know there's inherent errors with photo interp, so it does have a level of uncertainty attached to it. And we also have the challenge that even though we do a LiDAR acquisition, connecting that information to the EFI level, it doesn't always necessarily align well. So when we go into our next inventory cycle, our 5th, we're curious if we're going to be able to address these shortcomings of photo interpretation, and more so, is it going to meet our specified goals? Internally, we got about 6 goals for our next inventory cycle, 2 of which I'm going to highlight here, and that's delivering a more cost-effective, accurate inventory. And the second one is reducing or eliminating the reliance on manual photo interpretation, specifically for tree species. Yeah, and we still want to be able to continue to deliver rich products. We still want to be what we see ourselves in a leader to continue a good high resolution of and accuracy of the forest inventory. We're very open to leveraging new technological solutions, and we're trying to close the gap between our private lands being older and less accurate. There's always a delay in getting the forest activities for that particular area. So with these goals in mind, we know that it'll require a lot of streamlining, a lot of automation, and this will be key for increasing the inventory frequency and replacing the photo interpreted tree species identification, and it should greatly help, hopefully, with the alignment with the EFI grid. So our 2 key goals is the cost effectiveness, faster acquisition. That's one. The second one is reducing or eliminating our reliance on photo interpretation for tree species composition. So with those 2 key goals in mind, we connected with a number of vendors and experts to identify what could we possibly move ourselves towards to help address those 2 key things. What we've identified was that individual tree inventory and EFI combined, we believe that moving to that towards that type of inventory system, we have a little bit more possibility of capturing tree species in a better and more effective or efficient fashion. However, one thing that we've always sort of struggled with here in New Brunswick was that if you're familiar with our part of the country, we have a lot of tree species, and it's and because of that, we're kind of concerned if an individual tree inventory is going to work well in this part of the country. So we've determined that we need some kind of a pilot project to test that idea out and see if it does have any benefits for us. We selected an area of interest, pretty much smack dab in the middle of our province. It's our old 2015 LiDAR block. It's about 1 million hectares. And we've estimated it at the time when we were developing it that a project like this would cost about $1.6 million to acquire high density LiDAR and high resolution stereo imagery. And that pilot project we got approved for back in March of 2024. This is a bit of a broad timeline. Ideally, we'd like to start collecting the information back in June 1st. However, we were late to getting the RFP process all concluded. We managed to be able to sign a contract by mid-July, and we were fortunate to get planes in the sky by July 19th. Halfway through August, we actually ended up with about more than 50% of the acquisition completed for both the LiDAR and the imagery. And we were happy to report that there was 100% acquisition status by mid-September, which was our deadline anyway for leaf on. As for that pilot project's final deliverables, we're expecting them actually this month and into the next coming months. We've actually started receiving information this week, so that's exciting that we have access to that new information. So for this particular project, an ITI inventory will be done. The 15 centimeter stereo photography that was acquired is going to be used for tree training data and validation. With the acquisition of the 20 points per square meter LiDAR point cloud, individual trees will be isolated and segmented from the cloud, and the traditional tree dimensions will be measured, and based off of that segmented tree, a predicted tree species will be carried out. So yeah, there's a lot of things going to go on, a lot of information that's going to be used to help do the prediction of the tree species relative to leveraging wet area mapping, perhaps phenology via imagery, our soils information. So we're curious to see what things are going to be leveraged to help determine that tree species prediction. We expect that trees greater than 10 meters to perform well. However, anything below the 5 meters, because of the noise of the point cloud, we don't expect to get great predictions for that. We'll also be doing an EFI for this project as well. A hybrid approach will be used, where the ITI information will be rolled up to the EFI level, to a stand level area-based LiDAR metrics. And there'll be some adjustment obvious for where needed. Bias will be adjusted for as needed. For the amount of data, the ground data that we supply the vendor for doing this, we were actually able to supply them about 800 forest ground plots. So it's good to see that our hard work to collect that ground information is being used for this. We do have an initial feel for what species are going to I want to say will be predicted, because this is really going to be a test. There's a half decent feeling for these particular species groups that there's a reasonable set of confidence that they can get something similar to this. The spruces, there is an expectation to do some separation of the spruces, but I'd be curious to really see how well, because we have hard enough trouble identifying a red and a black on the ground sometimes. So I'm really curious if this is really this whole pilot project will prove fruitful in that particular avenue. We also expect to get fir to separate, which is actually fairly important to us. We expect to get the pines separated, which is nice to have as well. And and some other the remaining softwood species to be separated. As for the maples, there's an anticipation that there might be a separation between sugar and red. Again, I think that's going to be a tough one, but we'll see. And the birches, we probably will be able to get those separated as well. And perhaps a poplar group would come out of this, and maybe even another hardwood category that lumps sort of the other remaining hardwoods that perhaps there's not enough training data for. Beech is supposed to be something else that has promise in separating out. So if we just take this at face value and not sort of get into being critical of these species groups being able to predict, if the vendor that we chosen that's working on this gets to this level of success, then I suspect this could be a fairly good win. So we're very curious of the results. So with this particular project, we're getting a lot of deliverables. So we know we're going to get the traditional EFI metrics, and there's going to be a mess of them. And there's a table that owns line on the right-hand side there. And of course, we're going to get the accuracy and bias reporting to give us a level of confidence on those predictions. But we're also going to get an ITI inventory where we're going to get an individual feature class of tree points in both the upper and lower canopy. And for each tree, we'll have the cornerstone metrics for each trees, as well as the species composition, the actual assigned species or species group. So we're really excited about that. And no different than the past EFI or past LiDAR products, will continue to get an updated CHM, DEM, and DSM. One thing that we've added from the past compared to now is that we'll be getting the fractional cover, which our habitat section in our branch really likes to leverage for their planning, for their habitat planning. Overall, we estimated approximately close to 47 terabytes of data. And we were curious of how much it's going to cost. And just before Christmas, we were getting a rough estimate. And it's basically we're estimating it's going to be costing us close to about 47 to 50 grand, $50,000 for storing that data. And that's we haven't figured out the exact right mixture of whether it's going to be cloud or on a network drive, but we're sorting through that actually as we speak. So it should be interesting. It's pretty exciting to be able to get this data.
And, Rob, you only have a minute left. If you can wrap up, please.
Yeah, and that's it. So that's a nutshell of where we stand right now for forest inventory in New Brunswick. And I'm not sure if we're taking questions now or later, but I'm good either way.
Yeah, we have 30 seconds if someone has a question in their heads. So thanks a lot for that presentation. It was fantastic, Rob. It's really, it seems like a game changer moment, a shift in approach that you're taking right now.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
I really hope it works out. For Rob, okay, we have a question here. What accuracy rate are you anticipating for the differentiating between hardwood species given their wide crowns and morphological similarities? Will the results yield a maple group or identify individual maple species? Maybe you've touched on that a bit.
Yeah, we based on our talks with the vendor, sorry, our initial indication is that there could be a separation between red and sugar maple, but that's just the initial stages right now. I'm really curious of how well that will do.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rob, for that. And now we'll invite Frédérick to give us an update from Quebec. And I know there's another question and answer here. And I don't know, Rob, if you have, while Frédérick's getting himself ready, do you have access to these question and answer tab?
Yes. Is there a way to add AI or machine learning to photo interpretation?
Yeah, so maybe you can type your answer while Frédérick takes us
Sure.
off on the Quebec update. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you.
I can see your presentation, Frédérick. Go ahead when you're ready.
Sound is good too. Hello,
Yeah,
everyone. Today I will present my project I've been working on for a certain time. It's called Stereo Photo. It's a QGIS plugin for aerial photographic interpretation. It's been developed by me over the last few years. So today I'm going to show you what the plugin is capable to do as of today. Okay, the first thing I want to address is why we are developing a plugin. First thing first, photo interpretation is very essential for an annual process. So we have about a team of 10 photo interpreter in our team, and they work all year long on photo interpretation software. So it's very essential for us to have a good software. We are currently experiencing a problem with commercial software, so it's kind of a big problem for us. We always have to find a solution to fix some small issue that sometimes makes the work slow down. In the past, we also have a driver's issue with our government computer with the stereo graphics card. So it's another issue that's not very fun for us. And we have no control over the development of the software. So if we have a suggestion or if we want to add something to the software, we're unable to do it. So the question was asked, is it possible to create an alternative? The We use QGIS because QGIS is an open source software, so we are enabled to add a plugin to the GIS, and it's kind of a good thing for me who is a programmer. The other issue we want to eliminate is the stereo graphics card. So can we visualize in 3D without a stereo graphic card? And the plugin will be developed in Python because that's how the plugin, that's the language required to have a plugin in QGIS. So the first thing of a photo interpretation software, the basic features that are required to see 3D on the type of screen you see in the presentation is to visualize a pair of aerial photo on a 3D screen, to add a vector layer on top of the picture, with photogrammetric formula, switch between coordinates and a pixel. So it's essential that if we ask a pixel on a photo, we need to know where it is in the real world. So this is essential for a software. Also, what another essential feature is the image enhancing. So if we want to find the right species of tree, sometimes mixing the color and moving around the coloration of a picture, it allows the photo interpreter to be more sure of the choice he's making. So it's a good thing to have in the plugin. And obviously, we want to be able to move around the image to see everywhere. So this is an example of an aerial photo. So often our aerial photo overlap around 60%. So we use the overlapping part to view in 3D. And as you can see on both pictures, the lake and the small houses are both on both pictures. So if we combine those with the screen on the last slide, we will see the houses in 3D. The three, we can see that they are growing, they are big. This is an example of a picture with a vector layer. So as you can see, the river is identified by the vector layer, and other three groups are also defined by the vector layer. And this is an example of the image enhancing that is available in the plugin. So on the left, we have the original picture, and on the right, we have the enhanced picture. And this is a feature called min-max that is available in the plugin that can make a result like this. So we move from all green shrubbery to we have more purple, many shade of green and stuff like that. Also, the enhancing can be done with contrast, luminosity, saturation. In English, I'm not sure about this one, but netete. And you can also move with the three colors, so the red, the green, and the blue. You can add some blue on the picture and remove also the color you want. Another very important thing to have in the plugin is to be able to edit the vector layer, the vector layer that we show on the screen, because we want for an inventory to be up to date. We sometimes have to address what happened in the forest. So it's essential to be able to edit a vector layer. To ensure a most precise editing, the plugin also requires a digital elevation model. So it can make more precise calculation. And currently the plugin has a two-way of editing a vector layer. You can add a new vector layer, so you can draw a new area, or you can also cut an existing polygon to make two separate parts. One of the things that's also very important for a plugin is the user accessibility. It's kind of important for the user to be able to use the software with ease, and it's easy to understand, and he doesn't have confusion when he use the plugin. So we work with our photo interpreter to make it the more clear and easier to use. So in the past, we allowed to have a folder of pictures, so the user can add as many pictures as you want, and you can move around between each pair of pictures. So when you reach the end of a pair, the plugin loads you immediately to the next picture while keeping the scale you were viewing and the position you were at. So it's for user accessibility, it's necessary because it keep the flow going. The flow is always maintained. I also improved the user interface. So it was something that at the beginning, the interface was kind of hard to understand. So I had to adjust something to make it clearer, and that makes it easier to use. Also, another thing to make it more accessible is that between use, for example, your computer reset during the night, when you come back the next morning, some parameters are saved in the plugin, so you can keep working where you were on the same project you were at the last day. Another important feature is the communication between the plugin and QGIS. So the plugin Stereo Photo share information with QGIS, and QGIS can also send information to the plugin. So it's very essential that both keep talking with each other to share valuable information while the user is photo interpreting the picture. And the last thing we did was to publish the plugin on the official QGIS website. So now the plugin is available worldwide. Anybody can use it and find it. So it's now accessible for a lot of people. Okay, so this is an example of the improvement of the user interface I had to do. So on the left, it was the first one. So it has a lot of stuff, and for a new user, it can be hard to understand what to do and where to do it. So we remove a lot of stuff to make it a little bit clearer. So now the user just have to put his file of picture. He can add his vector layer and his DMT. or as we say in French, modèle numérique de terrain. And he can also open the Enhance in Imaging plugin to change the coloration of his picture. So we made it very friendly and very easy to use. So there's not a lot of a button and function that you need to understand to use the plugin. Okay, so what's coming next for this project? We are working with our teams of photo interpreters to test the plugin and suggest new feature. So very often I go work with one photo interpreter. He give me comments on the plugin and what should be added to make it more useful in the future. And we think on what he on that, and we add some feature, and then we go back with the photo interpreter and we test the feature. We find some bug, and it's very a cycle, but it makes us unable to add a new feature while taking recommendation at the same time. We will be adding the missing feature for in the upcoming development. And since last year and in the beginning of this year, we are reaching out to inform people outside of the organization that we are developing a photographic interpretation software. We are also looking for collaborators to either test or develop the plugin with us. So if you're interested in just testing the plugin, well, as I said, it's available on the QGIS plugin menu. But if you have a developer in your teams, you can also contribute in the code, in the code. And our goal for 2025 is being able to carry out production easily and efficiently while ensuring reliable results. Okay, and last thing, the code is available on the website GitHub, which is a website for hosting and managing software. So this makes the code available for anyone, and users of the website can suggest new code or signal issues. So this makes the issues known to everybody that use the plugin. So it's kind of perfect to share the information with everyone all the time. So this is the best way for us to do it and keep everyone informed about what's going on. And we also publish a user guide, but it's in French because we are a French province. So it's available on the website, and it explains how the plugin works, but the guide can also be used to share comments with us. You just take the guide and you send it back to us with your comments, and the comments will be taken and analyzed to see what we do with it. I've put the link of the GitHub on the slide if anyone is interested in looking it up. And that's pretty much it for me. If anyone have a question, I can take the time to answer it, or you can also contact me at my email if you want to participate in the development. If it's just testing the app and share comments, it's always appreciated. We are in early stage of development, so don't be surprised if there's not all the feature that other photo interpretation software have, but we are trying to make it as I said, we are trying to make it functional for this year for our production. So yeah, that's it.
Merci beaucoup, Frédérick. That's a lot of work that went into there. It's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I have a question here from Alex. He's asking, or they're asking, will the plugin read stereo photo formats like .sup in the future, which stores information regarding flight lines, external orientation, etc., for the .tiff files to ingest a whole flight line?
I'm not. In Quebec, we are not working with this file format. So for the future, it's not really planned. But as I said, if you want to collaborate and ask us and share information with us, we're always unable to add stuff in the plugin. It's the power of open source software is that we always have control on what we can put in the plugin. So if enough people have interest in adding sub file, we can make it work for the software. Yes. Okay. So Derek does it solve graphic card drivers issue? Yes, it solves it by the fact that we don't require a stereographic card. So if you have a computer that allows to plug 3 screens, you can use the plugin. You don't need to have as sometimes people call it, a flip card on your computer. So any computer can use the plugin. So it does solve the driver issue, but the driver issue don't come from our team. It comes from the IT department of the government. So we have no control of what driver can be installed on a computer or not. It's out of our hands. So by just removing the dependency of the card, it solves the issues in a way.
Nice. That is really cool.
Yeah, I can take the question. No, the active 3D will not be explored since NVIDIA also stopped the production of those type of screen. We are not looking to make work on active 3D. And in our team, we all have PluraView screen or a planar screen, or it's all of the employee in our team use a stereo graphic screen. So this is why we are mostly focusing on those type of screen at the moment.
Thank you, Frédérick. I had a quick question. So you said that the manual is available only in French, but how is the software available in English and French? Is there both?
No, we just are working in French right now. But it's the first time we reach out outside of the province. So if there's a lot of excitement outside of Quebec, we can try to make it both in French and in English if desired.
Perfect. Well, now people know. That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for hosting, and have a good day, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now I'll invite our Ian Sinclair and Ian Smyth to give our Ontario update. So whenever you're ready, you can share your screens and give your updates. There we go. Perfect. I see it perfectly. You're ready to go.
We're all set. Okay, perfect. So yeah, we're going to present or co-present some activities happening in Ontario. Our presentation has a bit more of a update focus, just with the current election period that's going on in Ontario right now. So we'll give you an update on where we are primarily with our T2 process, as well as Ian's going to dive into a bit of detail around some of the disturbance processes that we run to do some of our disturbance monitoring and target identification for interpretation. So that'll be kind of the main portion of our presentation. So it's great to be invited back to present at the Cross-Country Checkup, and just want to thank all the organizers for this great venue. We look forward to it every year, and it's a great way to see everyone and connect and share some ideas. So very appreciative of it. Thank you. So the outline of the presentation today is to kind of touch on our T2 inventory. So we're rolling into midway through that inventory production cycle. So we'll give you an update on where we are in terms of data collection from airborne LiDAR acquisition, VSN plots, inventory production, as well as touch on the disturbance mapping component at the back end. So Ontario's approach, if you're not familiar, we had a T1 inventory cycle that went from 2017 to 2027 with the goal of being able to bring that inventory or aspects of that inventory over to an enhanced inventory with LiDAR and T2. And so we're trying to use we're using T1 polygons from that previous inventory cycle, and then updating those polygons with LiDAR metrics that are being driven by a vegetated sampling network plot design. And then within those polygons, we're looking to bring in annual report records and also detect disturbance from using satellite and some elevation change detection techniques to update that inventory for the T2 cycle. So for the primary aspect of this cycle for T2 is the ABA approach, LiDAR enhanced inventory that was mentioned at the start of the presentation. So the idea here is to fly data, use that data to drive our field plot data collection, sample design, generate our plot level metrics and predict our wall-to-wall metrics, and then update polygons with LiDAR metrics, and then also use some of that satellite analysis as part of that update. So the current status in terms of what we've flown, we're getting close. We've got hopefully a year, maybe two, to finish out the project area. So we're getting down to a fairly small number, but also some remote areas that we're trying to operate in. So that makes it a bit challenging trying to close out kind of the tail end of the program. But we've got 26 forest management units completed thus far. On the field plot sampling, we are collecting a fixed radius plot within a 3-module arrangement. So we've got more or less an A plot configuration that collects LiDAR, primarily attributes to drive LiDAR metrics. So we're looking at, species density, live dead, in, out, diameter, heights, so forth, and those A plots. The B plots have a stem mapping component to them. And then the C plots are affiliated with our long-term monitoring framework. So they have a down woody debris transect. So there's a weighting of a percentage of plots per each forest that fall within those 3 modules. But a C plot and a B plot contain the same contents as an A plot. So they kind of nest together and support FRI, but also support some of our broad scale monitoring activities. We've been using the structurally guided sample approach prior to SGSR being released, and then we've integrated SGSR into the current sampling design to select those plots with the data being collected on an app that runs on iOS and Android. So and that's been a big success. It's been a development challenge, but it's been a big success in terms of trying to get data analyzed. And this year we've had some relatively good success in terms of being able to start to drive our audit process based on digital data submission and running some of the plot predictions against some of the plot measures to look for outliers and plots that might need more attention versus others. So it's been an interesting approach to be able to apply the data in that kind of automated pipeline approach. And progress today is 27 forest management units that are being completed. Just a visual to kind of show that plot type if anyone's interested. There's the A plot with the 11-8. There's a small tree plot obviously in that to be able to look at smaller trees. And then the B plot is more or less the same design, just with the stem mapping that's occurring within. Each plot has a set of 360 photos that are captured. So this makes it helpful for being able to work on models and evaluate data, plot data after the fact. So there's a plot network that was or a photo network developed for each plot that's submitted with the plot data, and trees are numbered, so you don't get to see all of them, but you can kind of start to reference where you are in the plot and look at field plot data. And this has been a big help in terms of trying to reconcile or learn what some of those different structure layers might be in the LiDAR point cloud data for modeling. Field plot progress in terms of where we sit by year. We're starting to close out a good chunk of the field plot data that we need to support the inventory production process that's aligned to our forest management planning cycle. I'll try to get through this quick. This is kind of the overview process that we've been working on for inventory production in T2. So it's a collaborative process where we have our industry clients providing an updated T1, what we call forest inventory input layer, where they're updating their T1 inventory with their annual reports of what they've planted and supporting information that they have. If they've got additional information that they want to add into that inventory layer, that's been done. Then that feeds into more or less the production of our ABA process, where we start to integrate the modeled LiDAR attributes into that. And then we start to look at the polygon fits to the LiDAR data with some segmentation analysis. And then there's the disturbance component that Ian's going to talk about, where we're looking at both spectral and elevation disturbance to start to develop targets for species review and photo interpretation targets. So we still have an interpretation component in the inventory process, but this is a way to try to target those areas of need, and we leave those targets, the priorities of some of those targets, up to the industry to identify where are those areas that we want to try to focus interpretation on for the T2. We've got 3 touch points where we sit down, formalize discussions, and then there's several discussion points in between these communications that we have. So I will turn it over now to Ian Smyth, and he can start to walk us through the disturbance components of the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Ian. And my first time presenting at one of these cross-country checkups, so I appreciate the opportunity to co-present with Ian. As Ian mentioned, I'm going to sort of take a little deeper dive into the disturbance component. Got a few slides on that specific process of sort of targeting change for interpretive updates. Before I do that, I'll just kind of give a sort of a preamble to sort of where that fits within the overall sort of remote sensing disturbance components of the FRI program. We wear sort of a couple hats here on the remote sensing side in terms of direct support to FRI production, but also providing tools and expertise to other areas that that require sort of remote sensing applications, whether it be for doing provincial reporting and updating land cover data, burn severity for fire monitoring, even into river ice monitoring for spring breakup. So the commonality around that is for all those components is that we're developing tools for data access, data acquisition, and also processing that can be leveraged and applied to the FRI program. So as as we undertake the T2 inventory, but also look towards continuous living inventory, we want to try and adapt some of these remote sensing tool sets for that. Next slide, please. So on the next slide, this just sort of provides a bit of an overview of sort of how we're integrating some of these flows within utilizing the different capabilities that we've developed. both continuing to leverage cloud APIs such as Google Earth Engine for data access to satellite imagery, and some of the automating some of the data processing and some of the analysis steps related to that data, primarily on the Landsat and Sentinel side, but also including POTUS. But also trying to migrate to the existing processes and developing new processes that are compatible with Enterprise solutions in the cloud within our Azure solution. So we're through this sort of cloud environment where we're ingesting image derivatives from Google Earth Engine, Google Cloud Storage directly into Azure storage containers, and then leveraging Azure resources such as Databricks with compute clusters available within that to do automation workflows to process a lot of this data. Workflows and pipelines that have been set up for batch automation. We're also trying to leverage some of the disturbance processes that utilize object-based software like eCognition. So we found ways to integrate eCognition directly into those workflows and pipelines so that it kept us. So with that, I'll jump into this this sort of application of disturbance mapping for assessing changes between our term 1 and our term 2 inventory. Something that we labeled as our hotspot. So because we're carrying forward some of the attributes from T1 into T2, most notably the species composition attribute. A disturbance mapping approach for T2 has been developed both on the elevation side and on the spectral side to try and flag forest stands that have undergone change over that time period. Once identified, as Ian mentioned, these areas of change are prioritized for further assessment to validation after an interpretive exercise, and then the inventory can be adjusted as needed. So the process is sort of capturing forest change since T1 in sort of threefold. It's looking at forest stands with significant change to forest cover, the percentage of conifer versus deciduous forest composition, as well as looking for non-reported disturbance such as canopy height loss, and that's something that we achieve through this elevation drive process. And also spectral change in vegetation, so more of the satellite drive process. And specifically, these processes result in information about specific changes to those stands. So this slide here, I'm going to start with is really looking at the spectral side, the spectral components, disturbance mapping. It relies upon a dense stack of data layers composed with Sentinel to vegetation indices, existing inventory information, classified products that we will have generated previously, such as the Ontario's land cover classification, Landsat time series, disturbance analysis that we conduct annually, and also LiDAR. And so these layers provide the basis for the sort of the two streams of the spectral side, which is running machine learning classification for disturbances, as well as assessment of composition. And it's all done managed within sort of a hierarchical object segmentation level process, where we are nesting these levels so that from the stand objects at the sort of the courses level down through objects that are generated to differentiate disturbances down to the pixel level composition analysis. Because they are stacked in this way, the attributes, statistics from each of these object levels are inherited. It's a fairly quick so if you go on to the next slide for the end. So the as I mentioned, it's a sort of multi-level object hierarchy And so those statistics from each level, sort of illustrating here on this slide, are sort of cascade down from the forest stands, which is basically segmented from the inventory stand information that you're seeing here in white, down through the disturbance objects, which are blue, down to the pixel level objects achieved through a checkerboard segmentation. See a little bit of the inset there. And so that sort of lays the framework for conducting the different analysis procedures to come up with changed. Next slide. So, this is an illustration of the forest composition analysis in which we're running a random forest classifier of those objects at the pixel level, at 10-meter pixel. And the model is trained off the deep seasonal stack of sentinel imagery. So from pre-leaf all the way through to senescence, the number of vegetation indices in each one of those periods. We're screening the objects so that by the through the inheritance procedure, so that we're not dealing with disturbed objects. And also we're utilizing the LiDAR canopy height model to restrict the classification to certain canopy heights to try to avoid fusion with ground cover. And so those at each forest stand can then be able to receive the percentage of conifers versus deciduous separation, which can then be applied back to look at the percentage of conifer versus deciduous that would contain the original inventory. Next slide, please. So this series of images on the right-hand side here sort of walks through one such sort of targeted forest stand that result from this, in which case we've got the T1 FRI, which has species composition of herbs and jack pine. It was a depletion in 2002. By the time we get to the T2 time period, based on classification of the composition of the first deciduous, we see that as a significant change, and so then this forest stand will be flagged and for protection. On the other side, just in terms of the looking at non-reported disturbances, again, this is a random forest classifier that's run on 5 years of peak Sentinel-2 vegetation. And so what we're trying to do here is we're identifying where these disturbances are, but then we're applying this kind of logic to what is the relative area of the forest that has been disturbed, what time period that disturbance happened, and then if we have a significant change to that forest, we will flag that for further interpretation. And by and large, we're looking at the time period for this as sort of post-LiDAR acquisition up to the time period of field pot calibration conditions, but also be able to forecast beyond, so up to current.
Ian, you just have a couple, 1 minute left if you want to wrap up, please.
Perfect. I'll just quickly cover this slide here, which is the other component of the disturbance mapping, which is the elevation component, and where we are bringing together the term from the T1 FRI, which was obviously a digital aerial acquisition. We're able to create a digital surface model through semi-global match. That we're doing a comparison or differencing with the LiDAR derived DSM. And what this is allowing us to do, because it's sampled at a 10-meter resolution, we can identify clusters of canopy loss, and do so because we're averaging out those 10-meter pixels, do so with sort of reduction of noise. And so these clusters of change, which are from the T1 inventory up to the time of LiDAR acquisition, coupled with the spectrally derived unreported disturbances sort of post-LiDAR acquisition and the forest compositional change, allows us to funnel this towards an interpretation validation exercise. Then helps the inventory. Sorry for rushing through some of that. I'll hand it back to you.
All right, well, thank you for the great insights. There's a lot of work going on in there. Ian, so we don't have time for questions, but there are some questions in the little panel. So if you want to take a look at it, Ian, and then type in your answers, that would be appreciated. There's already a question from Piotr. But thank you very much for the presentation. And now we'll move on to British Columbia for their update.
Hello.
Hey, we hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Okay. All right.
See you.
Great.
Oh.
Yeah, so this is like Ian, this is my first time speaking at the update meeting, and I'm happy to be here and excited to share what we've been up to. I'm a remote sensing specialist with the remote sensing group at Forest Analysis and Inventory branch. And I just want to acknowledge our previous lead and now manager, Chris Butson, who you all probably are familiar with, and Sasha Nasanova. But also the work is a much bigger body that incorporates a lot of the other groups within the Forest Analysis and Inventory branch, including ground sampling and analysis and things like that. The information that I'm going to provide today is more centered around an update on what we've been up to rather than a methodological type approach. So if anyone has any questions, please reach out on those fronts. Oh, okay. So just some things that we're going to cover. The provincial LiDAR program, which I'm sure everyone's heard of. I'll talk briefly about the vendor system and data, the acquisition status, and some of the work that we're doing to support that program. We'll get into the LiDAR forest inventories that we have, specifically looking at some of our standards documents and the different types of inventories that we're planning to implement. One item in there that I want to dwell on a little bit is the project implementation plan there too. And then we'll get in specifically right into the project status. So boundary timber supply area, which you would have heard from about last year, the interior Douglas fir zone, Invermere timber supply area, Callum. And we also have a forest fuels project that's ongoing. And then some initial work that we're investigating with model transferability. So I'm sure everyone's heard of the provincial LiDAR program. So this is a program that was announced in 2023. The idea is that this is free and open data for the 95 million hectares for the entire province at a cost of $35 million. The acquisition contract is scheduled for a 4-year term, and then at 6 years, so in 2029, the full data will be available. So that contract was awarded to Kisik Aerial Surveying. So they have quite a lot of experience surveying in the province, and they have 5 Quinn engine aircraft on hand, 2 that are full-time, 2 part-time, and 1 standby. And on there they have 3 Rigel scanners. It's the 1516. It's the dual scanner. Each of those have 2 megahertz pulse repetition rate, so we're talking 4 million points per second. And with their nominal flight height of just over 1,500, we have 35 centimeter footprints roughly. The data are coming in and they look really great. So as of January, this is a map of the areas that have been covered. And so it's managed at a 1 to 20,000 map sheet kind of tile. And so of those, there's roughly 20 million hectares that have been completely flown and an equivalent amount that's been partially flown. So given that, if we assume that there's 50% of those partials, we're ahead of schedule. So that's positive. GOBC is the branch that's managing the data acquisition and pre-processing. And so they've done a lot of work to get up to speed with training and refining their process. There is a bit of a bottleneck in terms of the ground control with the vendor, so it's a little bit slow to get out of georeferencing. But they're going back on some of the processes with tile size and things like this, but and as well as data quality assurance initially. It seems that GOBC and the vendor have resolved a lot of those issues. So they're really increasing the capacity, and the data are coming in pretty quickly now. So in that process, us at Forest Analysis and Inventory branch have refined our processes in terms of QA and specification checks, and also the processes for generating our products. We're also going to be producing this at the same 1 to 20,000 map sheets for storage and for hosting as well. And there's a link on the bottom of this, so if people are interested in seeing what's available in the province at the moment. So for some of the products that we're producing, they're very standard products that everyone would be familiar with, especially at this meeting. So the digital elevation model, or bare earth model, we're producing that at a 1 meter resolution. And I know for this group, I don't really have to go into the downstream applications of that, but in addition to enhancing our standard VRI, or photo interpreted inventories, there's also things like geoengineering, flood and fire risks that those products can be useful for. The canopy height model we're producing at a 1 meter resolution, again augmenting our traditional stereo photo interpreted inventories, but also at the base data set for our predictive forest inventories, or EFI in this case. These data are also helpful for habitat mapping and harvest operations. The individual tree database is another product that we're producing. It's simply a shapefile of the treetops. That is helpful in our VRI product as well. They use the sampling for that to guide photo interpretation. It's a base data set for our predictive inventories. There's applications for this in productive old growth mapping. It's also used for stand and stop tables in our enhanced forest inventories. And then the lion's share of our EFIs and what everyone is very familiar with is the canopy structure metrics. These are our standard vertical and horizontal descriptions of the canopy being produced at the standard 20 meter resolution. That's input into our models as well. Also has information on surface fuels and old growth and habitat as well. So the products that we're generating for the provincial program are obviously open and freely available. We're hosting this in object storage. So basically hosting a spatial index file of the map sheets. And within those, there's simple statistics on some of the underlying metrics, but also a data package download link. And so within that download link, there are 3 products that are provided. So the bare earth model and the CHM are a stack, the individual treetop, and then the canopy structure metrics. So the table on the bottom here shows what that would look like. So, so we've also spent a lot of time on developing some of the standards around our EFIs, and I'm hoping that this is an area where we could benefit from this community. We're going to have these things out pretty quickly here, and I'm hoping if anyone has time and the interest that they could review some of these for us and give us their insight. So one of the first item here is the specifications for airborne LiDAR. That one's been out for a little bit. That was out of GOBC and basically deals with the acquisition standards and data quality parameters. And if anybody is familiar with that, the provincial LiDAR is a quality level 2. And so that has all kinds of downstream effects. So yeah. The other item is updating our ground sampling procedures. So we have our change monitoring inventory plots, similar to NFI. We're augmenting that with an L type, which has been established for several years now, but we're updating that to reflect more modern positional requirements for those, so including multi-frequency, multi-constellation for plot center surveys and baseline distances, things like that. We have our LiDAR canopy height model specification. This was largely done for GOBC so that their forestry related layers would coincide with some of the stuff that we do. It's actually a smaller portion of a larger document that we have in-house for all the way up to canopy structure metrics. But the bigger feat that we've undertaken in terms of the standards is this product delivery specifications for LiDAR enhanced inventories. And this was largely motivated by private sector inventories that were purchased by licensees that are interested in having those considered for timber supply review and for policy. So that, in addition to the fact that we were getting really going with some of our own enhanced forest inventories, and we needed to establish some of those specifications for that. One of the items that's in that document is the requirement that there's a project implementation plan that's developed, and that if this inventory is ultimately to be considered for TSA or policy change, then it would need to be endorsed by the province before the project is initiated. Within that, there's also specifications on the different types of inventories that we're producing. So we have 3 tiers. The first tier deals with only attributes that are directly measured, so height and canopy closure. There's a second tier, which is our standard regression-based, area-based inventories. And then tier 3 includes either a stand delineation or more complicated modeling approaches, imputation, or things like that, to get at some of those attributes that have a less intimate relationship with the metrics. But obviously there's more to it. There's also the details surrounding data quality assurance, calibration, validation, and the ultimate inventory evaluation. So laying out those in that document's important for not only for us, but also for those private sector projects as well. So we'll get into some of the project status here. So this is just as an overview. Currently, there's 5.8 million hectares that are at some stage in the process of an EFI. Those that are completed, some scattered areas, the North Vancouver Island, Kamloops and Okanagan, again, kind of scattered. And then in 2016, we had Haida Gwaii, formerly Queen Charlotte's. It's a larger area there. And then the boundary timber supply area in the south of the province, that was complete last year. I'll get into the details of the status of each individually next. And then we have 2 projects that have been initiated. So the interior Douglas fir eco zone, we expect that to be complete in 2026. The Invermere timber supply area, which is in the north coast. And then we have Invermere, is in the southeast of the province, and Gelhorn is on the south coast, or the coast, north coast, I guess. That one's scheduled to be done in 2028, but still very much in planning. The boundary timber supply area you probably would have seen at last year's meeting, was at some point within the process at 600,000 hectares. It's complete with a tier 3, roughly 3 hectare polygons, which were delineated by a data-driven approach. The evaluation for that product is complete, and the inventory specialist's impressions of that is that the delineation wasn't what they were used to. So that's kind of one area where we're doing these incremental changes. There's also the fact that it wasn't layered by different strata, and there was no dead stratification. So some ideas on where we can improve. This inventory is available on object storage, and it's currently in the process of being integrated into our corporate database. The interior Douglas fir is roughly 1 million hectares. The tier 2 EFI is complete, the area-based approach. In this case, we're doing some live and dead stratification, so learning learning from what we had done in boundary. And we also have situations where there's some heteroscedasticity, so we've included error per estimates layers for those as well. There's a tier 3 in progress. We're also doing stereo interpretation for the delineation across here. Again, an improvement over boundary. We'll see if we can refine the automated approach down the road. We've had some challenges with the dead component as well. The Invermere TSA, timber supply area, is also scheduled for a full tier 3 inventory or a PFI or predictive forest inventory. It's also around 1 million hectares. The tier 2 sample design is in process, again, structurally guided sampling. It's older data, and this area is set as a priority for the new provincial data set. So the older data is actually being used to design the sampling design, and then the new data coming in will be used. So ground sampling this year intended to be complete in 2026. The Callum TSA is in the planning phase. There is some current data there. It's not complete, so we're not going to be using that, but it's also a priority for the provincial LiDAR. So we intend to have the ground sample out for 2026 and the inventory complete by 2027. There's the older data is of older vintage. So another project that we have on the go in partnership with the University of Victoria and the Capital Regional District, which is a local municipality that manages the clean water resource for the South Vancouver Island. It's a very small area. It's only 23,000 hectares, but it's an opportunity for us to get ahead of the dramatic changes that are happening on the land base in the province. So we're targeting some of the key attributes that are used for the Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System, including things like canopy bulk density and effective crown base height. So this sampling process has been augmented to incorporate that different objectives for this project. So we've included attributes that are sensitive to ladder fuels in this case. That data was collected in 2023. So it's an interesting aspect, and hopefully it'll be productive and has a place in our future projects. We also have some ongoing work with BC Timber Sales. And so they're really interested in having some of our EFIs for some of their areas. So this one in particular is near Terrace, BC. And so essentially what we're doing is taking the tier 1 attributes, which are just, they're not modeled at all, but the tier 2 ABA attributes in those models developed elsewhere geographically, applied to their data. And we can conceptualize how this would be very problematic for different forest types and things like that. So we're very cautious about how we're approaching this, but we've done this on a couple areas, and they're going out and collecting data and being able to evaluate how transferable some of these models are. In this case, these were models transferred from boundaries to very different forests. Things like species weren't even attempted, but the tier 2 attributes were. So we're working with them on that. And that's the update for BC. If you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Geoffrey. That's a lot of work, a lot of data to cover. Thank you for the update. While people are typing in their questions, yeah, I was curious as to how you were dealing with those few areas where your ground plot sampling is happening after the LiDAR acquisition. Are you retro growing, or how are you dealing with that for the synchronicity?
Yeah, so in most cases, we're not that far away, right? Like 3 years. And we really are targeting mature stands because we have faith in some of the data that are coming in from our results layers or the post-harvest data. So those kind of take precedence over our estimates. So, the difference in like growth between acquisition and sampling for those mature stands, we expect to be a little bit, within the error, but yeah, we're trying to stay very far away from, getting acquisition and ground sampling to be very distant, right? In terms of the Invermere TSA, we're using older data, but that's only to allocate the sample, just as the structurally guided stratification. So it's not actually we're using that data. It's just where we're going to allocate the plot, and then we'll get the new data and build the models with current ground and current LiDAR.
Perfect. Well, thank you for clarifying that. That's really interesting. Okay, so we're going to take a little 10-minute break. So we'll reconvene 20 minutes after the hour, or 25, I guess, in Newfoundland. And yeah, and we'll start off with the Saskatchewan update. Thank you very much, Geoffrey, and to all the other speakers and the first part of the CFI Cross-Country Checkup. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Before Lane takes, hello. So just before Lane takes over the podium for his talk, I just want to point out to Geoffrey that there's a question from Pablo in the chat. So if in the question and answer chat, so if you can look at that and type in your answer, that would be appreciated. Yeah, and take it away, Lane. We see your presentation.
Great, thank you, Paz. So today I'm going to talk to you about Saskatchewan's forest resource inventory and the progress that we've made over the past 10 years. So just a bit of history, Saskatchewan's provincial forest inventory program was disbanded in the mid-90s. And so it's been only about 10 years since we've been back in the business. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, is how we've been doing over the past 10 years. So for those of you who are perhaps unfamiliar with our little trapezoid, Saskatchewan's a province of about 65 million hectares, just west of the center of the country. We represent about 7% of Canada's landmass. And contrary to what you might see when you're visiting Saskatoon or Regina, over half the province is forested. This represents about 7% of Canada's treed area. So we're right on average, 7% of the land, 7% of the forest, right in the middle of the pack when it comes to forest land per square kilometer. But we don't like to think of ourselves as average. I don't think anybody really does. We have an ethos of grit and determination, of made in Saskatchewan solutions. And our inventory is really no exception to that. And it had to be. Our population, we have about 1 million people in this province. And our forestry-related GDP is significant, but it's small relative to the provinces that you've heard from earlier today. So we had to design a flexible inventory solution, one that could be customized to the demands of a license area, yet scalable in cost, so it could be affordable at various budget points. So 10 years ago, we started with a pilot study in a place called Fort Gelhorn, and that's this area here, about 67,000 hectares of LiDAR. There's 67,000 hectares in that test area. We flew LiDAR over a range of topography, soils, and floristic communities. From that toe in the water, 10 years later, we have what you see on the right side of the screen, a map showing 20 million hectares of forest inventory in various stages of production. So we leveraged that 67,000 hectare initial LiDAR acquisition with what we affectionately refer to as the Battle Royale. It was a head-to-head test of 7 inventory vendors who provided inventories ranging from area-based LiDAR solutions, individual tree LiDAR inventories, and spaceborne variants. We collected a lot of ground information, which was used to build and assess the accuracy ranges of these solutions. And with that treasure trove of performance data, then we could use our procurement processes to get cost profiles and figure out which methods we could deploy operationally for our forest resource inventory. In 2020, we repeated this head-to-head test idea, but this time we were looking at the accuracy of species predictions. We tested 12 different solutions on 3 different landscapes, and I'm just showing the results for one here today. But these landscapes range from a hilly but aspen-dominated area near Leoville, harvested and pine and spruce-dominated areas just north of Prince Albert at Timber Bay, and the diverse terrain of the Pasqua Escarpment, which is shown here. Lots of different species intermingled, lots of different slopes. We learned on this project that remote sensing solutions, either with or without LiDAR, were capable of getting reasonable accuracy in leading species, and that's what we're showing on the left-hand side here. So each of the colored bars represents a different solution that we tested. The y-axis here is a proportion of times in which the leading species was correct relative to an intensively cruised hectare of forest, or a series of intensively cruised hectares of forest. And the black bar represents a decade-old manual human photo interpretation. All of these methods at the time suffered when we looked at provincial forest types, which is a combination of leading species plus species composition in relative proportions. And so we learned from this process that our old air photo interpretation has lasting value, And we've been working on how to incorporate this, I don't know, expert opinion into new approaches which are compatible with the fine scale of EFI. And we heard earlier today about that challenge of making New Brunswick's talking about the challenge of how you get photo interpretation at that EFI pixel scale. We expect new developments on this in the coming year and in our approaches to incorporate this expert opinion. But we also expect that there will be great leaps forward, or have been great leaps forward, in the capability of new algorithms and new high cadence satellite constellations. And we'd like to offer our testing ground to any vendors who are looking to beta test their methods. So if you need some ground truth data to see whether it's working, we're happy to work with you. So in the past 10 years, we've gone from experimental, these two trials, which I think really helped us understand how things could be done, to fully operational. And we've touched almost every map sheet in our area of interest. So on the left, our AOI is color-coded by progress. These areas here shown in the blue are prioritization for getting started. Now we've done a little bit of work, but we're not quite at the official start line on these ones. Yellow areas indicate map sheets, or 10 by 10 kilometer tiles, inventory tiles, for which we've reached a significant milestone. Light tones indicate that the data acquisition is complete. Darker tones indicate that the data processing is complete, and the darkest yellow shows that the field data collection is done. Green tones indicate where we've completed and published a forest inventory on our data clearinghouse. We finished about 5 million hectares, and we've established plots everywhere west or east of 106 degrees. So this line right here, everything to the east of it, we've done some sampling. And on the right-hand side, you can see a map of our plot densities. So to date, we've established just over 1,500 plots, and our per project density ranges from about 1.1 to 1.6 plots per 100 square kilometer. So if you look at this map, you can see that you can see the plot density by map sheet as you go from blue, fairly low density, to gold, which is a really high plot density. These gold areas are atypical for us. This is the areas where we really had to pound plots in over small areas for our trials. So this is the Fort Gelhorn. We had another trial up at the Northwest TSL just to confirm what we were seeing before we went operational. The other pattern you can see on this map is gaps. These are those 10 by 10 kilometer map sheets for which we have no access outside of a helicopter airlift. And that is a big challenge for us. And speaking of challenges, at the beginning, I mentioned the challenges of resourcing an inventory over a large geography when you have a small driver of funding, small population, again, significant, but relatively small across Canada forest industry. We needed a design that allows different input data depending on our financial situation at the time or for the geography. And this was achieved using the idea of a multi-phase model-assisted inventory. So our forest inventory is primarily a two-phase inventory. In the first phase, we acquire remote sensing data, which is typically sentinel imagery and radar, and that's the areas shown here in the light green. That's the strategy we've used. Or LiDAR, aerial laser scanning, ALS, LiDAR data in the areas shown in dark green. So for our most active forest land base, we've gone with LiDAR solutions. And when we produce an EFI with these, we sort of brand that as the remote sensing acquisition is sort of branded as land cover and terrain. So the outputs of the Sentinel and the LiDAR data are used in the next step It's a structurally guided sampling approach. Using principal components to build similar clusters or clusters of similar remote sensing data. So on the top here, I've got a series of remote sensing data that we might be using. Those data are principal components are extracted from them, and then clusters are generated. And then we establish a plot in an accessible location somewhere in the middle of that cluster, in feature space or in this environment. That plot's then found on the actual real life geography, and we establish an EFI plot, similar to the way you've heard others talk about today. Then we use a combination of imputation and regression modeling approaches to produce an enhanced forest inventory, which we publish as our growing stock layer on our FRI portal, GeoHub. So this is similar to the CSM layer that BC was talking about. I've tried to show this process graphically here, where we've got a LiDAR canopy height model. We've got 3 field plots. Each of those plots has been visited with tree level measurements, high precision GNSS location, cookie cutting the LiDAR point clouds, and extracting the canopy height and the crown cover profiles from those, and then building various models to power our growing stock. So that's very similar to what you've heard all day long. I think that's a very similar application to what most other provinces are doing. What seems to be unique to Saskatchewan's approach is the second phase. Second phase is what takes us from a modeling exercise to a statistical estimate of the conditions on the land base. We sample to correct the inventory estimate, in essence, calculating the total volume and using inventory maps to redistribute this volume to each pixel in the landscape. Technically, this is a probability proportional to size sample, using stand volumes in cubic meters per stand and not cubic meters per hectare to efficiently select stands for sampling. So I've drawn that kind of schematically here. We can pretend that this poorly drawn red line is a selected stand. And in that selected stand, we randomly select a non-null volume pixel. And we establish a typical EFI plot at that location. So that's here, the sort of bullseye shape in the dark, in the black and gray. Then we expand this sample to a 2-hectare neighborhood. So that's a green box, and we establish a series of variable radius plots throughout that green box within the stand boundary. Those dots, or these plots, are shown as dots here on this map, but conceptually, they're, as I've shown illustrated on the right, where the cruiser or I would be the triangle here, and I would be measure or counting trees that overlap. The trees are the blue dots. Their imaginary plots around them are the circles, and I'm counting trees for which I am inside of the tree's imaginary circle. So standard variable radius plot sampling. This approach really helps us in that we can compare the performance of our inventory at multiple scales. So we can look at how well are we doing at the EFI pixel scale, and how well are we doing at a 2-hectare neighborhood. And that 2 hectare just happens to be the median size of our EFI polygons. Now, there was an asterisk on my previous slide about methods, and that's the total inventory approach we've been working on in the Prince Albert timber supply area in collaboration with Saga Asgi Management. This 3 million hectare AOI is our most active for commercial harvest. It really is our breadbasket. And this leaves us less room for error in our inventory. So the approach we use here starts with the typical area-based EFI, but instead of relying heavily on structurally guided temporary sample plots to build our models, we are relying more heavily on a 5-kilometer grid of permanent sample plots. Ground accessible grid plots provide the main framework for the inventory, and then the structurally guided approach is used to select locations that are gaps between the areas that we sample with the grid, and we establish TSPs so that we complete that range of conditions to be sampled. Instead of a second phase where we sample to correct the inventory, we use the observations from the grid as a sample estimate of the land base, and then we can ensure that inventory predictions are aligned to that grid. The systematic sample approach is easier for us to explain to the public, and it has a benefit that will allow us to monitor change over time. And so this approach seems very similar to the CLI method that Rob talked about in New Brunswick. So on the other end of the spectrum, in contrast to the total inventory approach that we used in the Prince Albert TSA, or even the two-phase inventories I spoke about earlier, we're looking at expansion approaches for those areas which are very challenging to sample. So this is essentially what Geoffrey was talking about for Thunderbird in BC. In this approach, we're going to forego the first phase of field sampling. So instead of building an enhanced forest inventory from plots that are local to a project area, we're looking to transplant neighboring models to new geographies or customize new models using a combination of already existing plots from multiple nearby projects to power our first phase inventory map. And what that does is it allows us to focus our resources on that phase 2 sample. It reduces our plot count by about 75%, which allows us to incur higher per plot expenses in the remote areas. So if we have to use helicopters or boats to access plots, it's much more expensive than if we can do it with a truck and an ATV. And reducing our plot counts just allows us to get reliable inventories. And again, because the phase 2 approach is used to we're going to use that to ensure that our inventories are unbiased. I think it's going to work quite well. And the application of this approach is shown here in the map. The dark green indicates where we've done the typical two-phase area-based approach using airborne LiDAR. So again, dark green through here, through the main part of the wood basket. Light green, our typical two-phase approach using spaceborne optical and radar imagery. Yellow, we're expanding that spaceborne solution into the south, the forest fringe, where ag land use exceeds forest management, and most of the land in that area, yellow zone, is privately owned. And the areas in brown are where we're going to use ALS point clouds or LiDAR data to expand models built in these green areas northward or southward. So we've got some work to do to get all of this done. We've started a lot of geography, but we have an approach in mind. And thanks to the science teams at Pacific Forestry Centre and a dedicated team of analysts, engaged field staff, reliable contract delivery partners, and trusting managers at the Forest Service, we do have the skill set and the resources to get this done. On the planning side, it's kind of the unknown piece for us. The next frontier is the far north. So that's shown in blue here. How do we do an inventory where the glacial tills of the boreal plains give way to the thin soil and exposed bedrock of the boreal shield? It's new to us. We don't have a lot of experience working in those conditions. That's where our methodological uncertainty lies. This is expensive sampling, remote, very remote locations. And we'll be looking to our colleagues in Ontario and Quebec and with the Canadian Forest Service to help us develop a new strategy over the next little while for how we take on the north. So I mentioned that this was our 10-year.
Our time's up, so could you wrap up in about 30 seconds or so, please?
That this is our aluminum anniversary. And if you ask me how to celebrate that, I'd say with more aluminum, pound in more plots, finish these maps. But our job's not done when we publish a map. These are living estimates, and to keep them alive, we need to keep an eye on growth and mortality and changes in forest area. We need to understand the fourth dimension, and that's how we're preparing for our platinum anniversary. Thank you very much.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that conclusion and for the presentation. So while we're waiting for Guillermo to set up, feel free to write questions for Lane in the chat, the question and answer chat box, and hopefully, Lane, you can answer those, or people can reach out to you if they want to follow up. I love how you gave an example of how multidisciplinary and how collaborative your inventory is, getting people from on board from all different sides. So I really thank you for that example. I think it's important to remember that we're all in this together, almost sharing this knowledge. Okay, Guillermo, you're just getting that presentation ready. I can see it. You are almost ready to go. Oh, I see you in presentation mode. You're good to go.
Hold on. Which screen I'm presenting?
Oh, no, switch to the other screen. It was perfect the first time.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna have to do one quick thing. How is that?
Oh, that's perfect. You're good to
Okay,
go.
excellent. Thank you. So great to be here. And what I'm gonna show you today is something much more different at the very nitty-gritty detail of the individual trees. So what we are trying to do is to create a census of trees, so every single tree in a stand. And what you see in the right-hand side here, each point or each triangle here represents a tree that has attributes like the species, height, DBH, volume, etc. So this is what we are after. Okay, so before I start, I would quickly like to acknowledge my collaborators, both at the CFS and the UFA, and also I want to mention Weyerhaeuser, who has kindly give us permission to work in one of their cat blocks. So this is what I'm going to be talking about today, and let's take it away. So what is this thing of AI square? So AI square is simply the use of AI models to detect and classify objects in very high resolution aerial images, such as those from drones. In this study, we're going to be using YOLO, a popular open source AI that we are being training to draw bounding boxes, what you see there in the photo, around 3 crowns, and YOLO is able to do this in a single pass to draw boxes and label them with their 3 species. So why we do this? If we are to do precision forestry, we need a forest inventory at the individual tree level. And we can do that through AI, sweeping, for example, through drone images and create a census like the one I showed you before. And then we can use that, for example, to design a thinning operation using a harvester drone. So I can hear you thinking, yeah, Guillermo, right. Well, this is not sci-fi. There is this Swedish startup, Forestry, who has developed a prototype drone of 6-meter diameter. You can see it there, that can lift about a ton and can go to a specific tree and down the harvester head, cut the branches, go to the bottom and cut it and bring it up to a landing for further processing. So this is not yet operational, but we're getting there. So yeah, this is timely. So anyways, let's get to our study now. So we have been working in this 12-hectare, and this parallelepiped you see here is about 12 hectares. The actual cap block is smaller than this. It's the part that is dominated by lodgepole pine. And there are also poplar, aspen, white spruce, large, and of course, undead trees. And we want to map them all using AI. So what we do is we create in the lab a mapping mission for our drone, and then we go to the field, and then the drone flies following parallel flight lines, taking overlapping photos, takes about 2010. For the AI part, you see one of the photos here. For the AI part, we use the central portion of the image because outside of it, there is tree lining, and that makes things more complicated. So this is how the central portion looks like. As you can see, very high definition. We have about 1 centimeter spatial resolution here. So these 2,000 photos are aligned and stitched together into an orthomosaic using a structure from motion software. And then we managed to get this ortho where everything is seen from directly overhead at this pump jack, sorry. And then as a byproduct, we obtain this dense point cloud that you can see here. And not only the point cloud can be used to create raster like a digital terrain model or a canopy height model. And an important feature, you see these little black lines, they are not trees. These are the position of the cameras and the aim of the camera that we can obtain very precisely through the structure from motion software. And then we are going to be using that information to project the 3 boxes back and forth from the drone photos to the GIS. So we are working on this August orthomosaic, but we also have from other dates a fall one and even a winter one that we're going to be using to help the photo interpretation. So for the photo interpretation, instead of drawing bounding boxes around each tree crown from scratch, to save time, we use an initial YOLO model that our UFA colleagues trained on annotation they created. And then the prediction from the model were edited by a UFA student and then QC'd by us based on ancillary information such as the photogrammetric point cloud and the October ortho that shows, for example, that this tree crown is a large, not a spruce. So this is an example of how we went from the initial predictions that have been messy, like you can see this big large, and we go all the way to the QC where you have, a high quality reference data set. So this is the result, and these are the count of instances from each class in this data set for the area of interest, and also in brackets for the eastern half of the AOI that we use for testing. That is, we don't do any training, and we just use that part to assess the accuracy. In addition, we also established some forest inventory plots, but I'll talk about them later. So let's go now to the methods that we follow to train the AI model, create the tree census, and assess its accuracy. So this is the data split. As I said before, we divided the AOI into portions, training and testing. Within the training area, we have these green squares that are reserved for validation. That is, the model is trained using trees outside of these boxes, and then is applied and validated in the green square. And we do cycles of training and validation that are called epochs, and this continues until there is no further improvement. So each square is about 20 by 20 meters, and this particular one we're going to be using as our running example today. So we had this YOLO V11, and we train 2 versions of the model. One that is trained on the orthomosaic. That is the easier way of doing it. But the problem with the ortho is, as you can see here, there are artifacts in these drone orthomosaics. because of a number of issues. However, you see that the drone photos are much crisper. So we tried both and see what would be the difference. So when we use the drone photos, we had to go back from the reference data set that we created in an ortho. We had to project the boxes to the photos. And then when we had the train model, we had to project back the predicted boxes down to the ortho. So for that, we use open source Python code that our former MSc student, Ruth Rash, now a Pinterest AI specialist, created for this purpose. You can use it, it's freely available. So here is an example of a projection from GIS to photos. And there is this blue box, and then we had to find, you see these white outlines at the ground footprints of the different photos, and we had to find the photos in which that box is seen, that is these four, and then we project the box into the photos using this code. So this is the same tree in the four photos seen from these four different photos. So then once we had the training and validation set for each modality, photo-based and ortho-based, we run the YODO model training using these parameters. And so I cannot go through that, but it takes about 12 hours to do a training session, and it, using a high-end computer that we have with 2 GPUs. So after training, we found actually that the photo-based model performs better than the ortho-based model, and it's actually about 10 percentage points greater in recall and a little less in precision, but it's better. And so from there on, I'm only gonna be talking about this model trained on the original photos. So because we use the drone photos and not the ortho, now we had to, once we do inference, so we apply the model to the entire AOI, we had to project the boxes down to the GIS. So here are the predicted boxes. You see that each box has a label and a confidence score with the likelihood that the box is correct. So let's focus on just a few of them. For example, this dead tree that you can see in the 3 photos that are consecutive. We are flying in this direction towards the west. And then what we do is, again, these 3 photos, we use the code to project the boxes into the GIS. And because it's seen in different photos, we get duplicates that we need to get rid of. And for that, we're going to take advantage of the box confidence scores. And here again, the same area, the same example. Here are the projected boxes that the AI predicted from different photos put together into the ortho. And so what we do is we remove duplicates, starting with the boxes with the highest confidence, and we remove those overlapping predicted boxes that have a lower confidence. So this is the end result, and you can see that there is only 1 box per tree. Of course, it's not perfect, but this is what we're gonna see next. Now, however, we had to add more attributes. So we had now the location of the trees, their crown size, and the species, and now we can add the height using the CHM, and we can use as crown radius, the half width of the box, that is the perimeter divided by 8. And then once we have the crown radius and the height, we can get DVH through published allometric equations. And with DVH and height, we can get the merchantable volume of the tree. Finally, we convert the boxes to points using the centroid. And voila, this is the individual tree census I showed you in the first slide. We have obtained for the entire AOI. So before I go to the next slide, pay attention to these spruce and these 2 dead trees that are here, because now that we have the census, we have to assess its accuracy, first regarding the detection classification, and then regarding the other attributes. So here we have again the same area, and the translucent boxes are the reference, the photo interpreted reference, and the hollow boxes are the AI predictions. So let's look, for example, to this dead tree. This is a reference. There is no counterpart in the AI, therefore that one is false negative. And if we go back to the spruce, we can see that yes, there is a predictive boxy. And by the way, we don't understand exactly why, but the predicted AI boxes tend to be a little bit larger than the reference, but that is going to play in our favor later. I'll explain later. But anyways, this one is clearly a match. It's a true positive. And then we had this other dead tree here. It was detected, but because it has the wrong label, it's probably a dead spruce, but it's dead. So we had to deem it a false positive. So once we have the false positive, false negatives, and true positive, we can derive accuracy metrics. And yeah, and so this is for the classification. For the attribution, we established 15 circular plots of 50 square meters, and we measure the trees inside. And here is an example. This plot here is this one. So for those trees that we could clearly see in the ortho and that have a matching tree both in the reference and the AI, then we compare the ground measurement with the reference or AI measurements to derive RMSE and bias of the reference census or the AI census for height, DBH, and merge fall. And then we can, with the censuses, we can compute the total merge volume for the entire cap block and compare it to the ground also. So let's see quickly the results. Here's the confusion matrix for the individual tree classification. So out of the 6,000 trees that are in the testing area, 80% of them get correctly detected and labeled. The results are not that great for the less represented classes that the few dead trees and the larches. But boy, for the pine, they are impressive. We have a precision of 96.6%. And also when we see the detection disregarding the tree class, we see that we have a detection rate of 84% and a commission error, so the complement of this of 15%. These are the scatter plot for these 68 matched trees that are inside the ground plot that we established. On the top, you have the comparison between ground data and the drone data for the reference, for the interpreted reference boxes. And in the lower part, you have the same for the AI predicted boxes. So the RMSE grows as we go from a more direct measurement like height to a model one like DBH or merge volume. And we see from the red trend lines that we tend to overestimate the low values and underestimate the high values. And we also see that the bias, though, is better for the AI boxes because they are bigger. That created a little positive bias in the DBH estimation, which ended having almost no bias for the merge volume. And you see the reference data set is minus 14%. And this explains the next result. So here are the three average values for height, DBH, and merge fall by species, and the total merge fall per hectare for the entire cap block. So on the top, you see the photo interpreted reference, and on the bottom, the AI prediction. And amazingly, The estimate from the AI, this 277 cubic meters per hectare, is within 3% of what we obtained from the ground survey. So, yeah, this is, we were surprised to get such good result, which is even better than the reference. But again, the reason is these boxes, predictive boxes, being a little larger, which ends up getting a better DVH estimate. So let's finish with a few conclusions. So we managed with the AI and the drone-based census. With the AI could achieve an estimate of merchantable volume that is within 3% of the ground estimate. It's pretty amazing. We also corroborated that it's better to work with the original drone photos than with the orthomosaic, but it has the difficulty of this projection back and forth, but it's worth it. Yeah, and we had very high precision for the main species of interest there. But if we were going to use this for something like the harvester drone, we want the drone not to crash the harvester head. We want to go to the right tree. So we will have to have an analyst QCing the result from the AI. And these are our next steps. We want to try to what degree we can use the same train model in similar areas without or with very limited training, and then we had to compare with the whole volumes. And I was hoping that I would get the whole volume estimate for this caplog because it has been harvested a few weeks ago, but the logs, I talked with Casey from Weyerhaus yesterday, and she said that they are still waiting to be hauled. And anyways, we'll publish this study hopefully soon, and the train model will be publicly available for people to use it. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guillermo. That is amazing work. What a surprise, that you're so close with the AI.
Yeah.
The actual ground
Amazing.
measurements. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but feel free to write your questions in the question and answer box. And then Guillermo, you can keep an eye on them to see if you can answer, and feel free to reach out to Guillermo for further questions. His email can be found on our website. Yeah, so then Alexandre, if you can take over and share your presentation, and we're ready for you.
Yes, just a second, please.
Perfect.
Okay, so yes, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. My name is Alexandre Morin-Bernard. I'm an assistant professor at Laval University in Quebec City. So not the first time as a participant to the cross-country EFI checkup, but first time presenting. And I'm happy to talk to you today about monitoring growth and growth declines in boreal forests. So my presentation will go over three main sections today. So firstly, I want to talk about previous work that we've conducted on mapping growth and growth declines, mainly using satellite imagery and LiDAR-derived variables as well. Then I'll go over the new phase of the project. It's only just started, so no real results to present, but I thought it was important to discuss about it. And finally, trying to link all this back to the EFIs by explaining maybe how I see a potential integration with another project that we have on automated stand delineation. So starting with our previous work, what we've did in this project is that we've selected two forest management units in the Boreal, so one in Quebec, north of the Lac Saint-Jean, and one in Ontario, the well-known Romeo Mallet Forest. In these two sites, we established a total of 52 sample plots. So these plots were established in mature, even-age, black spruce-dominated stands. So relatively homogeneous in terms of composition, in terms of structure as well, meaning that they were all even-aged, but considerable range in basal area and stem density. In each of these plots, we collected around 30 increment cores, so for a total of more than 1,500 increment cores that we've analyzed in the lab to build these average site series that you have on the left. So you have the Lac Saint-Jean and the Romeo Mallet site. What we've noticed immediately when looking at these series is the growth decline, the generalized growth decline, at least when we look at the average series over the last maybe 10, 15 years. So starting in 2011 onwards, maybe in both sites. Of course, this decline was not present in all of the plots. Some of them had modest declines, only modest declines, and some others has really pronounced growth declines up to 50 or even 60% decline in growth rate at the plot level. So we tried to understand what happened there, looking at non-replacing disturbances or stresses that could have occurred in these two sites. On the left, you have the time series of the SPEI value, so drought index. And what we can see is that over the last 20 years in both sites, we had 3 of the 4 driest years in the last 70 years. So abnormally dry years there. And also at the same time, an eastern spruce budworm outbreak. Like the extent and duration of it was much larger in the Lac Saint-Jean site, with the defoliation starting back to 2010 or something like that. Whether in Romeo Mallet, I think defoliation only started in 2018 to be significant. So I won't go into details to what factor exactly is attributable to growth decline, but what we've tried to do basically is see if we could predict and map these growth declines over our 2 study sites. So we first established a threshold for the growth declines to be considered as severe. So over a certain percent in growth change between our reference period, here the period A and period B, we flagged these plots as having sustained a severe growth decline. And we've used logistic regression to try to predict if one site has sustained or not severe growth decline. Our predictor variables were in 3 categories. We had metrics, spectral indices derived from Landsat time series. So some static metrics, but also more dynamic, if I can say that. So the slope, the evolution, the trend in some spectral indices over time. We've used the LiDAR data to extract topographic variables, such as the wetness indices, the slope, elevation, etc. And we've used our field inventory data to calculate some structural attributes. Of course, it's the mean DBH, the basal area, etc. Then using a model selection process and variable selection process, we've identified 3 variables that had a significant effect on the probability for a plot to have sustained a severe growth decline. So the basal area of the stand was related to that, the wetness of the site, and the slope of a spectral index, the tassel cap wetness for those who knows about these spectral indices from Landsat. This is where the EFIs come into action. So to map the basal area over the sites and to make predictions over the largest area as possible, we've used the local EFI at both forest management units. Here you have the example for Lac Saint-Jean. And we've used the LiDAR data as well for the topographic wetness index and use our Landsat composite to get the tassel cap, the slope of the tassel cap wetness, which allowed us to make predictions of the probability of severe growth decline during this precise period. So between our period A and B, as shown of the 3-ring series a bit earlier. As you can see, we're far from having wall-to-wall predictions. Why? Simply because we were in even age black spruce mature stands. So they're common, but not that much on our study sites. Our accuracy was not bad, relatively good, even when using spatial cross-validation. So where we don't use adjacent areas necessarily in our train and test data sets. Of course, our number of plot was relatively limited. So, like I think this approach has shown some some potential to be extended. Just a parenthesis here, in a concurrent project at the same time, we've looked at using not increment cores, so not tree rings, but repeated measurements from permanent sample plots to predict the net basal area growth rates over, for instance, 5-year or 10 years interval. And we've tried to predict that using only Landsat derived predictors, so the same spectral metrics that we've used in the other project. And we've applied this model. We've trained and applied this model on not necessarily much more diverse, but relatively more diverse array of stands. So boreal stands in general, so not only black spruce, but also jack pine with a bit of white spruce and balsam fir as well. So our square is not impressive, our MSC not that bad as well, but we were clearly able to see differences in the trends across the landscape, and also related to the structure of these stands. So we've looked at the LiDAR data, the LiDAR profiles of these different stands, and generally we had a good it was coherent with the development stage of these stands. What we're working on right now, it's a collaboration we've only just started with the Canadian Forest Service. Okay, so we're trying to go a little more general. So instead of studying only mature even-age black spruce stands, we're trying to apply the approach to black spruce stands in general over Canada, so extending the spatial extent of the project and the diversity of forest types. So we're using the large tree ring database from the CFS. And this time, we're not studying, of course, a single event because the idea is to eventually be able to develop a monitoring tool that could be applied continuously over the years. So what we're trying to look at is the percent growth change over time. So how, from the basal area increment, how does the percent growth change in consecutive moving averages evolves over time. To do that, we've had to change a little bit the variables that we are using. So we don't have access to LiDAR data for the entire extent of Canada, so it prevents us of including very fine scale digital elevation models or forest attributes or EFI data, because we don't have them for the entire extent of the project. But we've decided to include climate variables. So climate variables which we can extract under the form of raster layers and daily climate data. So we're computing extreme climate events indices such as late spring frost, drought periods, and other of these events that can have a considerable impact on forest growth. And in this project, we're also looking at not only predicting the probability of severe growth decline. This is the first step of the project, so to identify the periods where the percent growth change exceeds a threshold, which could be considered as exceeding the natural or expected variability in growth rates over time. So we're not only trying to model the probability of severe growth decline, but maybe trying also to model the percent growth change itself, or even the basal area increment, so the average growth rate over a time window of 5 or 10 years, to be able to map this growth rate over the landscape. So I would have liked to present more results, but we've only just started, so keep tuned, and eventually we aim to be able to present some results. And one of the big objectives of this project is also to be able to generate predictions over larger areas. So if we want such tool to be used in forest management or in forest monitoring systems, or even for silvicultural decision-making, we need to be able to provide information at a larger scale. So in order to To do that, that's why we're progressively extending the number of species, the diversity of stands that we're looking at. But of course, it comes with a lot of challenges. When you have complex irregular structures, then you have some isolated mortality with sometimes hardwood species coming out, broadleaf species coming out. So it brings a lot of challenges with respect to the Landsat and spectral indices in general. Okay, so as I just said, the idea is eventually to reach the stage where we're going to be able to provide the spatially continuous product, or almost, as we do with the EFIs. But what we've noticed so far with the EFIs, some of you talked about it today, that despite over a given territory, despite we provide like these fantastic raster layers, for instance, this is one for canopy coverage. Sorry, I don't have a legend, but it's just to illustrate that despite we provide these products, when speaking to some of my colleagues that are forest practitioners or collaborators in the different provinces, I realized that some of them don't really like using raster layers or don't really know how to analyze them and integrate them in their workflow. So lots of people or practitioners prefer relying on the good and old photo-interpreted polygons. And I can understand why in terms of planning interventions, it's much easier than when you have to deal with 20 by 20 meter cells. That's why we've started working on advancing towards automated stand delineation. So in this project, we're using raster layers as inputs. So it can be raster layers from an EFI, for instance. We're using a generic region merging algorithm to create polygons or to create areas that are homogeneous in terms of characteristics, and then polygonizing these regions to generate something like this. This is our latest, one of the latest version of the product. So it's an entirely automated stand delineation that was done based on LiDAR metrics. So for our project, we've tested using both the EFI, the EFI, so for instance, the merchantable volume, but also using the raw LiDAR metrics such as the 95th percentile of height, things like that, simply because in some of the areas that we're working in, we don't have access to the EFI yet. It's still in production. So eventually we would be able to integrate that. Until now, we have quite good results. Like the delineation is coherent with the forest types and the characteristics that we can see in the field or from the LiDAR point cloud. So this is in Romeo Mallet, it's the SPL point cloud. So we can see clearly the difference between a stand that is relatively open with moderate height, a stand that is that the canopy is a bit more closed with higher trees as well, and another site where maybe we have less gaps, higher density, but a very low height compared to the other stands. So why am I talking about this right now? Is simply that okay, we can basically use any raster layer as an input. Would it be the metrics, the EFI layers? And why not use our predictions of growth rates or the probability of growth declines if we succeed in mapping it over a sufficient extent, spatial extent? So I come back with this product, for instance, of the predicted growth rate over a 5 or 10 year periods. So this is the same area in Romeo Mallet for which we have done the prediction. What we can see, the polygons are the same that I've just shown you. So polygons are derived from LiDAR metrics, but the raster cells that you have are the predicted growth rate from our Landsat model. So we can see there's some fit between both maps, but especially on the left, for instance, we can see that within a given stand, there is still some variability in the predicted growth rates. Of course, we still need to develop these models and assess better their accuracy over the landscape, but eventually we'll come to the question of what's the most relevant to delineate stands. So should we delineate stands based on their current conditions, so the structural attribute as they are at the time of the LiDAR acquisition? Or would it be interesting to delineate our polygons based on their growth rate, their current growth rate, or even what could be linked to their potential growth response to stressors, or even to silvicultural treatments? And we could even use like topographic variables to delineate these stands according to maybe more the operational constraints and the site condition. Of course, there would be some similarities between the different approaches, and I think there's not necessarily a unique answer to that question, but I thought it was interesting to bring this perspective today to you. So that's all for me. I'll be happy to answer any questions, or would it be today or later by email? Thank you.
That is awesome. Thank you, Alexandre. I didn't even know that you were going to present on this automatic stand delineation when I put my introduction together. So I'm happy that you addressed that topic. I don't know if we have any questions coming in for now. We have another minute for people to write them in, but if you want to write them later on, then Alexandre will be monitoring that question and answer box. And also thank you for sharing your email. I had a quick question though for you regarding that automated stand delineation tool. Are you planning on putting it into an R package or some kind of sharing that tool with others?
Yes, all of it will be open source. So it's as part of a grant from the Ontario Forestry Futures Trust. So everything will be open source. We're trying to do it in R and make it as simple and fast as possible. So we're going to publish a package probably to do the stand delineation, so people will be able to input their raster layers, set the parameters for the algorithm, because you can play with the spectral homogeneity and the threshold for merging polygons together. But yeah, the idea is to publish the package and a guide for users.
That's fantastic. I hope that everything comes together with you integrating that project with your other and generating some great products, stand products at the big scale. So good luck on that, and then and thank you again. Now we're going to move on to Joanne, who's going to wrap up our EFI Cross-Country Checkup with, I think, a very appropriate overview of enhanced forest inventories in Canada. So I'll leave it to you, Joanne. You can take it over.
Great. Thanks so much, Pez. Thanks for organizing. Thanks for the invitation. I was thinking, I think this is my 9th cross-country checkup. I think we started doing this back in 2016 or 17, something like that. So we'll have to do something special if next year's the 10th. So I am going to start by reiterating a message we've heard frequently today, and that is that the strategic level forest inventories that jurisdictions are generating are foundational data. They're important, they're authoritative core data sets that are used to inform a broad range of information needs. I think we take this for granted, and I think it's easy for us, especially those of us who are outside the inventory community, to forget that how important these data are. So what are these forest inventory programs?
Joanne, just before you move too forward, could you put yourself in presentation mode?
Oh,
in your
okay,
PowerPoint?
sure. I thought I was, but I will.
Okay. Click on the little. It might just help open it up. There we go. Perfect. Now we see it.
Better. Thank you. Sorry about that. So these forest inventory programs are seeking to produce data that are current, complete, reliable, accessible, and relevant. And they want to provide information on the status, trends, and condition of the forest, and provide us with the capability to forecast future conditions under alternative scenarios. So from a science point of view, our research looks to increase the quality, efficiency, and value that we get from these inventories. So I want to talk today about a synthesis project we've been working on for a while now, which seeks to provide a national snapshot of where we are with EFIs in Canada. So the objectives of the project were to review and synthesize the current state of forest inventory practices in Canada, document the different status and approaches to EFI implementation across the country. You've got a sense of that today, how different things are being implemented in different areas of the country. Identify emerging trends and associated challenges in the greater use of remote sensing technologies for forest inventory. And then most importantly, I think, identify and articulate shared research needs and opportunities towards the development of a common and nationally relevant research agenda. So part of the motivation for doing this work is that it hasn't been since the mid-1990s when this kind of national snapshot was done through the work of Don Leckie and Mark Gillis with the Canadian Forest Service, who published these two papers. So I'm happy to say that our synthesis work is very soon to be published in the Canadian Journal of Forest Research. It's in press right now. I just want to acknowledge my co-authors for their help and contribution to this. I also want to acknowledge all the inventory people across the country who took their time to speak with us, to answer our questions, to send us documents, to help us understand how they were doing things in their jurisdictions, and to help us identify research needs. So greatly appreciate those people as well. So to understand where we are right now and where we may be going in the future, it's important to understand where we're coming from. So we've identified 5 eras in forest inventory in Canada, building off the work of Bickerstaff and Hervonen, who also with the CFS published a similar type of synthesis way back in 1969. So this first era was really about aerial sketch mapping. So not using photos, just sketch mapping from planes to identify areas of high value timber, and then using strip sampling to provide more detailed information for those areas. We see photos start to emerge in this era, and Canadians are really recognized as world leaders in this ability to assess the value of large and relatively inaccessible forest areas. Then after the Second World War, we enter a really period marked by a lot of innovation in forest inventory. This is when aerial photography and stratified sampling really emerged. Many of our first provincial forest inventories were actually completed during this era through cost-sharing agreements with the federal government. So under the Canada Forestry Act, about 275 million hectares were completed. And these agreements set forth standards for how those inventories would be completed. And from that emerged our real standard 2-phase forest inventories, where we do the photo interpretation or photo delineation and interpretation, followed by ground sampling. So that's sort of been the de facto since that second era. In this third era, we see widespread use of black and white aerial photography. Color photos are still really reserved for special projects. And of course, the metric system and computers figure prominently near the end of this era. And also we see at this time an increasing divergence among jurisdictions in terms of how they're implementing their inventories. We enter this fourth era with more innovations. So a move towards digital aerial photography, geographic information systems, of course, completely transform how we store spatial data and our relationship with it. Soft copy photogrammetry emerges. And we also have EFI in a research context in some operational trials emerge as well, which takes us to where we are today in our fifth era. Again, aerial photography, digital, still very much dominant. As we've heard today, we're moving towards targeted photo interpretation for all the reasons that Rob articulated in his presentation. Airborne LiDAR is becoming increasingly available, and the area-based approach is considered fully operational. So airborne LiDAR and enhanced forest inventories have been a disruptive innovation in forest inventory in Canada. We can't agree on what to call it, but these types of inventories go by many different names following similar principles. So this graphic here describes the diffusion of innovations, a theory that was first put forward by Everett Rogers in 1962. It's about how innovations move through society and get adopted. So how do we move from niche users across this chasm, if you will, to mainstream users? So niche users are really driven by vision and excitement of new technologies, while mainstream users rely more on reliability and practicality. So they're only going to adopt an innovation if it's proven effective. Now, LiDAR has been able to cross the chasm and has come into mainstream use. And what are some of the factors that contribute to that? First is compatibility with existing processes. The second is trialability. So in an innovation, can we test it before we adopt it? Can the results of the innovation be observed by others? What's the relative advantage of the innovation? So does it provide us with something better than what we're currently working with? How complex is it? Is it difficult to implement? Compatibility, trialability, and observability have all been demonstrated through numerous pilot studies and operational trials that have been conducted throughout Canada over the last 10 years, some of which have been published in the peer-reviewed literature. A relative advantage, much more difficult to characterize because we often don't know quantitatively what the performance benchmark is for our current existing inventories. Several cost-benefit analyses have been done. There's been 3, perhaps, in the whole country, but they're not widely shared or widely available in the community. And lastly, complexity is where science and tech transfer have a huge role to play. It is why we publish the best practice guides, why extensive knowledge exchange programs over the last 10 years related to EFI have been undertaken. So our synthesis work considered the full ecosystem of EFI implementation. For the sake of time, I can only really speak to EFI output products, and I want to highlight research needs and then provide some key takeaways. But the publication covers all these elements in a lot of detail. So it wasn't that long ago, we used to have to share maps that look like this about where LiDAR data was being acquired in Canada. And now we can share maps like this. So I want to give a shout out to my colleague and co-author, Piotr Tompolsky, who generated these beautiful maps. So we now know that about 177 million hectares of LiDAR data have been acquired within the forested ecozones of Canada. This represents about 66% of Canada's managed forest area. And we're only talking here about LiDAR acquisitions acquired primarily for forestry purposes, so not for flood mapping or other applications. These are primarily forest acquisitions. We're also not including here research acquisitions that have been done in the Yukon or in Newfoundland, for example, or the Northwest Territories. So this is more our focus here. We've committed to maintaining the maps and updating the information and the statistics available for that. So Piotr's created this website, and we will continue to maintain this. One of the things that gets me really excited is where we are starting to have overlapping data, because we're really interested in how we can characterize forest growth using multi-temporal LiDAR, and this gives us an indication of where those data sets are becoming available in the country. So in terms of the EFI outputs itself, is it operational or not? So for 4 jurisdictions, it was. For 4 jurisdictions, it's not. That is really a not yet. That's why that asterisk is there. So some jurisdictions, as we've heard today, are still in the process of operationalizing their EFIs. And for 4, it's primarily still a research tool, something that they are exploring. Is it the primary or secondary source of information? So for 3 jurisdictions, it is the primary source or one of the primary sources that is being used. For the others, it's a secondary source of information. In terms of implementation, I was chuckling a bit at the photo or the slide that Pez showed this morning, where he had data architects and all these different people involved in the process, which is great. But in reality, I think a lot of the EFIs are being implemented by very small teams of people, such as the Jeffs and the Ians and the Robs, who are doing a lot of this work and wearing many different hats at once. So 2 jurisdictions have done their EFIs completely in-house, 2 have outsourced it, 5 have used a combination of both of those things, and 3 have done theirs through collaborations with researchers. In terms of specifications, which we also heard about today, 2 jurisdictions have EFI specifications, 7 do not or do not yet. And for 3 jurisdictions, the existing inventory standards apply equally to the EFI. So in terms of what we identified for research needs, I want to start by just highlighting that the operational implementation of EFIs has really led to many new research questions and challenges when we start to scale these things up. That's often how this plays out. So although the operationalization of EFI is increasing nationally, a research focus may actually be shifting elsewhere. So since 2021, really, we've seen a decline in the number of papers being published in the peer-reviewed literature that focus on the use of airborne LiDAR or remote sensing more generally for forest inventory applications specifically. Partly this may be related to novelty because the area-based approach is considered operational, and so any methodological gains are perceived as incremental by the science community, even though operationally they're hugely significant to these programs. And also because we see people moving towards other platforms, so more drone-based data, more spaceborne data. And the reason for that is those data sources are cheaper to work with, they're easier to design experiments around, and it's harder to get access to airborne LiDAR data for these specific applications. It's harder to work over larger areas as well. So in terms of research needs, through our consultations with jurisdictions, we found 6 areas really that are research priorities. The first is methodological improvements, so automated stand delineation, transferability of models, and then benchmarking and consistency. We've heard about all those things today. The need for additional attributes like tree species, mapping forest fuels, estimating product mixes, and somehow getting a sense of stand age. Growth and yield. How do we grow the EFI forward? How can we characterize site productivity and use the LiDAR to help us do that? How do we update these inventories and move towards a continuous forest inventory type of framework? And then also field plots. Field plots are an important part of EFI. We've heard that today as well. How do we improve measurement efficiencies for those? How do we automate Q&A processes? How do we reduce sampling intensity? And another thing we've heard today, individual tree approaches. So how do we move those approaches more to an operational context? And coupled with that, of course, is very importantly, how can we improve individual tree crown segmentation? And then since we're in this 5th era where we're really transitioning from a forest inventory approach to something that's quite different, how can we use LiDAR data now to help us improve our existing inventories? What sort of data assimilation approaches we can use? How can we leverage photo sampling? And how can we improve the characterization of specific forest types, such as boreal forest types in northern British Columbia or mixedwood forests in southern Ontario and southern Quebec? So some key takeaways then from what we've learned. To summarize, forest inventory workflows are at a crossroads. The degree of operationalization and implementation is highly variable. EFIs represent a major departure from traditional approaches. They're detailed inventories over large areas that really blur this distinction we've traditionally made between what's a strategic inventory versus what's an operational inventory. A disruptive innovation. So EFIs have resulted in an increased divergence of approaches among jurisdictions. So previously, air photos, two-phase inventories, there were differences, but the methods were pretty similar amongst the different jurisdictions. Now we have a case where people are using different input data, different ground plot sample designs, different modeling approaches, and differences in the products that are being shared out. There are currently trade-offs with the EFI. we're lacking species, but we have estimates of other attributes that we typically may not have in our strategic level inventories. And we're sort of in a place right now where there's no inventory solution that's capable of satisfying 100% of what our user information needs are. And as a result, some jurisdictions are maintaining multiple inventory products. So this is a transition period, and the transition period is going to be painful in some cases. So the pace of change in this fifth era of forest inventory is unprecedented. So previously, when I showed you the different eras, we learned that over time, technology has really slowly transformed our inventory practices. But in this most recent era, that pace of change is really accelerating. And to a certain extent, it's really outstripping our capability, especially for governments to respond in terms of our procurement, our policy. And it's also really shortened the life cycle between research and operational uptake, which also means that we need to further enhance collaborations between researchers and users. Ultimately, though, the degree to which the enhanced forest inventory is being used to support decision-making, such as timber supply allocations, will be a key indicator of how successful we've been in implementing these EFIs. So science has a huge role to play in continuing to advance EFI workflows and outcomes. And research needs identified in our synthesis highlighted numerous opportunities for increased collaboration, both between jurisdictions and between jurisdictions and researchers, which is something the cross-country checkup was really designed to also foster and accelerate. So with that, I'll say thank you. Again, just a plug, if you want more details, they will be available in the paper, which will hopefully be published soon. And just to raise a flag for Silver Laser, which is happening this fall in Quebec City. And it's a great conference. It's the foremost conference for the application of LiDAR in forest inventory. And practitioners and researchers are highly encouraged to attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne, for that overview. It was fantastic. And thank you all for participating to the EFI Cross-Country Checkup this year. Joanne, if you have a second to plug the ALS data coverage website on the Q&A, someone just asked for that link. But remember that this event is recorded, so you'll be able to find that link once we post this video on our platform. So don't worry, this information will not disappear. Yeah, I can't thank you all enough for helping to make this event possible. So thank you to our panelists for presenting their insights, and thank you to our participants for being here and sharing their questions with us. And yeah, we hope to have this event again next year. And if it is the big 10 year, maybe we'll really have to do something special. Yeah, so thank you all for coming. And if you have a second also, we're going to put up a little survey that just a satisfaction survey and get some information on where you're coming from. So please fill out the poll. It helps us make sure that we are doing a good job and representing everyone in this event. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next year. Bye.